Yes. Okay. Well, we are 2020. What a year it's been! Incredible.
Incredible, right?
Um, we've all got through it, and it's one of the great things about this year for me in terms of music is being the fact that I've really dived into it even more than I would normally. Music's become such an important part of my life and everyone's life. You know, it's therapy, as Archie Shep said.
Mm.
Music is the healing force of the universe. And I think this year has proven that. And I've been really thrilled to be on the radio, to be able to represent kind of, and to kind of connect with, get hopefully the right tone and support music. And actually, right now, I've just come off the radio with Lauren Laverne, where I was celebrating a record by Salt, the group Salt, which is set up by Inflows. It's won the album of the year at Six Music this year. Great record. And it's interesting because when I was talking to Lauren on the radio about it, because I've been championing it for a couple of years, I paralleled it. I said, this is a record that, like Blue Lines by Massive Attack or Goldie's Timeless, it's a record that in 25 years' time will still resonate. And here we are 25 years later after the release of Timeless, and in that lineage of important, critical British iconic records that could only come out of the UK. Here we are talking together, Goldie, and discussing for the hour or so that we've got together the Timeless album. And what a record! What a great record to return to and to listen back to, and to celebrate. And it's the first time that I've really listened to it in full since it came out, really, since that time. Because being where I am, and same as you, we're always looking forwards. We're just with that person. So it's rare that I actually kind of go back to something, and then usually it's so much pleasure I get if I find a moment. And this was great for me, listening back to the Timeless. And
Well, I think you've been championing this new record, Salt, right? You're saying Salt, Branswood, coming out in Branswood.
I wish, you know what I mean.
Right.
No.
So this artist, for example, you found this artist from somewhere, or where did this artist come from? Salt.
Yeah, well, so Salt are Sault. They are basically the idea of the producer Inflow, who produced the Michael Kiwanuka album and produces Little Sims. And basically over the last 2 years, he's been creating this kind of, shall we say, sort of not imaginary, this kind of super group.
Wow.
And they've been releasing records, but in the old-fashioned way. So whereas most of us, we kind of receive our music via, someone sort of suggests or recommends something, whichever way. This record, literally the first one, they've put out 4 records in 2 years. The first record, I picked it up in Berlin in a record shop. I was in a record shop in Berlin and I bought an album, because the guy was playing it. It's like a real old school way of hearing music. Right. And I hadn't received a file. I hadn't been told about it by anybody. And that's how they approached their kind of idea here. And so over the last 2 years, they've released, 4 albums now. Last year, they released an album called 5 and an album called 7. And then this year they released a record a month after George Floyd being murdered, and that whole energy that was going on with Black Lives Matter and all of COVID. They released a record pretty much instantly, which was really reflecting the mood. And that was the album called Untitled Black Is. And then a few months later, they released another record called Rise. So the reason that Black Is such a winner, I suppose, album of the year, amongst people who listen to all kinds of music, not just people within a certain, scene, is because it kind of connected on a lot of levels. So, that's where Salt were. But listen, that's a really great thing. And these people, when I speak to Inflow about it, records like Timeless to him are part of this line, which, if I really think about it, British music over the last, since the 50s, 60s, really, but certainly when it comes to dance music, we've just put out so many classics already. And every year there's 1 or 2. And then you've got the real top ones. You've got the Portishead Dummies. You've got, Burial. You've got Massive Attack.
Yeah.
I feel good that I released the Young Disciples album. I think to me that was quite an important record in the kind
Well,
of
I want
connect.
to get back to that. One thing, Giles, don't get too close to the mic, it drops a shadow on your face, right?
Oh, dog, that's no
Yeah,
good, is
yeah,
it?
cool.
That's no.
So let me just a minute. I mean, the thing is, Giles, you mentioned about new artists that come up with these new ways and going back to old ways of putting out records, like you said, Salt, and the influence sometimes of how you look at, Portishead, Massive Attack, and for me, that whole Bristol sound,
Mm,
you know, Timeless, socially there was a massive change, and I think great albums not only are, maybe they are, involved with technology to a certain degree, with electronic music being, Timeless being one of them, but you look at Portishead as a band, you listen to Live at Roseland, those albums, and you listen to how they were performing them. It was a different thing. It was that whole kind of British band thing that was mixing it up. I think Portishead for me were mixing that electronica on the, Massive Attack were very influential, along with Smith and Mighty, which was for me the dub version of all of them.
mm,
Smith and Mighty doing covers,
mm,
doing their versions, coming from dancehall in that respect.
mm.
So for me, going to Bristol very early on, going to Coasters Cafe, hanging out with 3D, doing the documentary with Bombing, me and D go back so far, to Transatlantic Federation, which is me, Brim, Bio, me, Brim, Bio, Vulcan, doing a graffiti show at Birmingham Library, and then going, me going stateside with Birdie, meeting all these early writers. And the thing is that album is a coming of age album. Timeless is one of those albums where, because of the crossroads where we were socially, me being into b-boyism, which I still am, socially things were changing, rave culture, the kind of like the separation between government and socially, we had all this rave stuff was going on, and you think about the way that socially we were going to rage, which is my first kind of thing, experiencing all these great sounds from Nookie to Simon Baseline Smith with the Absolute 2 label, Production House, Ibiza Records. For me, coming back from New York and Miami and getting into London culture as opposed to going back to the Midlands, it was a massive influence for me, because there was an overground of soul to soul, warehouse parties, the Triangle, Bristol house parties, and going New York, Miami, Birmingham, New York, Wolverhampton, New York, Miami, back to London, and not going back to the Midlands was a big thing. And being in Dorney Tower, Chalk Farm, going to like Camden and Zoom Records, which is a big thing for me to go and listen to all these new sounds coming out. And I was alien to it because I've been American-fied, if you like.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? And all of a sudden, it's this rave culture had its own sound. And I felt really frustrated, wanted to be a part of that. But I'm listening to breaks and Cool G Rap and Polo and the whole kind of New York and then Miami bass scene. And then coming back in, I was always associated with, mixtapes, breaks, and Reinforce really were the boys that really did it for me, seeing them at Astoria. And it was Nebula 2 and Mannix doing a PA. And just hearing, Head in the Clouds with Mark and Digo, it was just blew my mind. It was like, this is it. This is breakbeat in a whole other way, in a whole other guise. And it wasn't as kind of helium as the rest of the stuff, even though it was kind of like quite different. I found that the break aspects of their music was for me where I felt at home. So that was a massive influence for me in the beginning of my early beginnings of Roughage Crew with Linford and doing those first EPs. Chris Biscuit being the first one, and then into Dark Rider. And that was an important time because, Linford had a great record collection, man. Linford was like a b-boy, had his collection, and I was always about putting it together. And I remember going to Reinforced originally to do artwork for them. Redesign the logo, I can do this stuff for you guys. Because I was doing stuff for like Rob Manley and 10 Records and 1159. Remember Dan and those guys down at Cuts doing their little band thing. So I was overground and underground, but that really appealed to me because it was early rave for me, where I was completely oblivious to what was really going on. Discovering WAG was one thing, but discovering Rage Spectrum at the time was like wow, like mind blowing. This is really happening in the UK.
Can I ask you a
I,
question about
yeah.
that? Sorry, can I ask you a quick question? Because I think, to me, as I'm listening to you talking about that time and coming back in from the States, and suddenly it's a whole new picture, I suppose. You must have come in at a time when there'd been so much craziness had changed. When did you take your first ecstasy tablet? And how much? No, because I think that was really critical for that scene, you know, because I was playing on that scene
Yeah.
pre and post, pre, during, and post, and it completely changed over purely on the basis that some people took it and others didn't. And so, from your point of view, where did that
I'll tell
have
you,
that
yeah,
power?
I'll tell you straight. I mean, it was Kemi and Jane, you know, Storm. I mean, I'd come back from New York and I was in at Gus's place. You know, I was going to Camden Zoom Records and Red or Dead was there, the shoe shop. So I met Kemi through Red or Dead. You know, blonde dreadlocks was completely different from me. He's like, what the hell? Like, it's complete. Like this sister looks completely different. You know, blonde dreadlocks, working in Red or Dead, and obviously Zoom was next door. And I said, you know, let's go out on a date, let's go out and whatever else. And I was giving her, you know, the big one, blah blah blah. And I was like, B-boy, you know, been in New York, been in Miami. And she was like, don't care about that. I care about rage on a Thursday and finding a rave. And I'm like, oh, I want to come. So I kind of started hanging out. They were in Archway at the time, you know, Crouch End, and I said, take me to Rage. So we went to Rage. And I was going to the WAG every Saturday, going to the WAG every Saturday. You know, Nelly, Dom T, you know, Fat Tony, and then go to Bass Clef. But this was a whole other thing. I've kind of been doing that. And then meeting Kemi was this massive opening of the underground. So we, you know, went to Rage, and I was in the queue at Rage maybe 5 or 6 times. They had a membership. There's a membership queue, a normal queue. And I couldn't get in. Every time I waited in the queue for like an hour and a half, Kevin at the door and Paul Churchill would go, "You look dodgy, mate. Not tonight." And I couldn't do anything. It was like, you know, it just was like you couldn't give it a big one. It was like, that's it. So like, came all right, and they just go in, and I go and meet him later on. And I tried like 5 or 6 times, and went another time, and Paul Churchill went, you know what? He's a trier. He can get in. And I went in, and I walked into Rage in a goose down, black fur collar, trench coat. Walked in there, walked into the main room, and I was just sweating, thinking, what there? There's people on podiums, lasers. And it was, for me, it was like seeing the first graffiti train, or, you know, the first experience of real, like knowing that Britain had gone, you know, UK Underground has got its own thing going on, man. And this wasn't, you know, my ego was already big enough. I'm like, yeah, B-boys, you know, New York breaking, blah. And this was like, this ain't this. This is completely different. We'd had old school New York influence before, but we weren't New York. This was British. This was underground, South, North London, East London, West London, all in one place. And I think it was an M25 I took. And I think half an hour in, when you know, Toby was seeing Jane at the time, says, you're gonna be sick. So yeah, of course, coming up. What's coming up? Completely obliterated the bathroom, and then came back into this like, I love everyone, I want to hug everyone. It was like, and the music became just surreal, like completely. I mean, it's a different thing. I think that there are people that never, and people that did that didn't. But for me, being an artist, Pandora's box was already open. So that experience was so big. It was just like, I just heard everything on a whole other level. And it kind of spoke to me on a whole other, because I was still, the cogs were turning at it. And, you know, most people getting monged out. And I was like, I want to make this and everything, the sound and everything else. And, you know, and it was kind of like, I got looked after by my little rave crew, Kemi, Toby, and Jane, and I think it was Adam. He was working at the shoe shop as well, and we all went back to Kemi's, and then played loads of tapes. So you'd sit there and just go, you know, rage was one thing, and then you'd get back and you'd go through like 3 or 4 hours just playing mixtapes, you know, sets from Amnesia House, or, you know, like the Eclipse in Coventry, and little snippets of tunes, you know, when it was Mickey Finn, or, do you know what I mean? Like certain mixes have been put together, and you just hear all this music. And I just wanted to do that, but didn't know how. And it was, you know, then it started expanding into like going to Astoria, going to Ibiza raves, or Plumstead, and all these other raves. So the influx for me was, it was almost as if I just took off this kind of Americanism and just kind of went, I'm done with
Yeah.
it. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Do you think you'd have made the same music
And,
if you hadn't taken ecstasy? I mean,
to be honest, I don't think, I think there's a, for me as an artist, there's a process where I would indulge, and then, you know, like Thursday night, Friday's like you just trying to get your life together. You know, the weekend comes, you go to another rave. Sunday, you obliterate. But come Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it's like, I want to make music. How do I go about doing this? So all these concepts start going in your head, you know, because you do this while you're buzzing and you start thinking about all these things. And I mean, I'll be really honest with you. I remember I'd already tried acid, it never quite worked. Really bad trip, crazy. You know, like in Wolverhampton, it was some like Strawberry Fields Forever, Stone Roses, mad mixes where football fans were just doing smiley E's and just, they weren't fighting anymore. And then I left for America and came back to London. So the whole experience of kind of going into that, there was times where we were doing like acid, and I think one of my first trips with Toby was like, well, I'm gonna talk you through this. This is what it's gonna be like. You got to let go of everything. I remember doing these trips where I'm turning glass fish around, and then they disappear, and I'm just sitting there trying to turn these glass fish in my mind, and it's just weird because all of these concepts were kind of like, you either use it in a different way, but musically the sound was always a thing that was in color, synesthetic. It was this thing about color and sound, blues being bass with purples and oranges being strings and vocals being like bright yellow, and you know, you create that world. And to be honest, no, I wouldn't have done. But the difference was that I think that in any music, whether it was Captain Beefheart or whether it was Can, I could see it as kind of being not as indulgent as that process, but being a little bit more disciplined with, it's the tool, like ayahuasca in a sense, but a synthetic version. And, you know, obviously later years, different things happened. But I think for me, I felt that conceptually, I was always doing that art from graffiti in my head with colors, and I wasn't painting, but I was painting in sound. And I think the first break for me was Mark Rutherford, Johnny Gosling at William Orbit Studio, which was round the corner from where Kemi was in Crouch Hill. Annie Lennox had the studio on the corner at the church. And they went, that's where Annie Lennox is. Do you know what I mean? Like, all right, cool. You see her once in a blue moon. I'll go to William Orbit Studio. And I turned up there and knocked the door and said, listen, I want to hire the studio. I'd already been to Reinforced and said, look, I've done the artwork. I want to make an EP. I'd been to Iceland as an experience with a guy called B, God rest his soul, no longer with us, which is the first 12, which was an Ajax project, which he engineered. And I just sat in and kind of, this and all these mad ideas I wanted to lay down. And we sat up late at night doing, me, Kemi and Jane, doing potato prints with a potato in reverse, Ajax projects on 12 inches, take them to Mo's Music. And that was the first record. And of course, from that money, going to Reinforce, I said, look, I want to make an EP, and I want to make a 12. And I was raving with Linford. I said, listen, let's just go to the studio, I'll bring all these records. And I was literally like, I want that. I want to sample Spike Lee. I want that, you know, SOS Band. So because of the history of soul, from my point of view, and Rare Groove, and Linford's history of B-boy breaks, I remember Mark Rutherford saying it's 1,500 quid for 3 days. And I went, there you go. There's the dough. And you got 3 days to do it. And it was literally sample all the sounds one day, arrange the second, mix the third. So I always had a timeline. And we did Chris Biscuit, and I think Jim Screech was on the other side. And I remember Mark Rutherford turning around saying, are you sure you want to sample all these tunes? I'm like, yeah. He went, but where's it all going to go? I'm like, don't worry about that. I'll deal with it. And of course, I was doing these every week and having this, you know, this place where it's all going to go. This mad, you know, visceral soundscape of where, in my mind, where it was going to go. And he turned around and said, you've got like 3% left in the sampler. It's full now. That's it. Cool. Second day, go in there. And I just arranged it all. What do you want to do now? That's what you do. Turn around. What do you want to do? Well, I want that there. Linford put his little idea in. We put something else in. And lo and behold, for me, when you listen to those tunes now, it's like b-boy eclecticism. They just go through loads of moves. Do you know what I mean? Like 16 bars there, 8 bars there, change, move, drop, out the drop into the next thing. And that really came from being a b-boy. And of course, I was racing ahead, into the next EP, Dark Rider. But to put a nail on it without being too detailed or losing people, for me, all of that experience of those 2 EPs with Linford were huge because we had a lot of sound, and it was literally like flicking through a book. It was like going like that through all of the kind of breaks, assembly line, all these mad breaks that we were looking at, samples and stuff. But for me, it was about arrangement. It was always been about arrangement because I already had a wide soundscape, being really odd, from Matheny to like Captain Beefheart to Steel Pulse to Dennis Brown to all these mad things. So for me, it was about arrangement, always has been.
So year-wise, are we talking 91, 92? When?
91, 92 was the first kind of movement. We'd done the kind of white label we'd be. That blew up at Moles, and then it was into Reinforced. And then, of course, a lot of the attention started moving. I'd go to Reinforced, because doing an EP outside of Reinforced never kind of really happened. They were in-house. And I said, trust me, I've already done the artwork. And they were kind of like, oh, he's mad, just let him do it. What could go wrong here? He's off the money. So I had 750, they had 750, paid the 1,500 quid, and gave them the 12. And they were like, shit. And it was getting played, and it was, I think Menace was on there. Was it Menace? No, Menace was on the side of Dark Rider. And I think Menace was the first kind of, great vocal sample crossover. Andy C played it every week. Randall was playing it. Hype was playing it. And for me, I felt like this, it wasn't enough. It was like we could go somewhere with this. And of course, Reinforced, I'd go to Digo and Mark, pretty much every day, and go and sit in with Mark and Digo. And in the daytime, I'd sit in with Digo and do Del Di Go Go, or we'd have a little rollout. And then he'd go on at like 5 o'clock, and Mark would come, and they'd swap over. And then I'd work with Mark. So my sound has always been Mark and Digo, light and dark, always. Saint Angel. Angel goes Angel into Saint Angel. Still Life is Still Life, and it flips into a darker side of it. They taught me. They're the university of sound. And then, of course, all the other influences, Primary Source, Underground Software, all of their other pseudonyms, Tom and Jerry, all of their influences with what they were doing. They were way ahead. 4Hero, when Mark and Digo put the 4Hero hat on, but Digo, different gravy, because he was always jamming on the keys, doing his Rhodes thing, and
how did you connect with them in the first place? Because they're such outsiders, even within the scene at the time. They weren't really going out, and they were just in Doddis Hill, out in the middle of nowhere, with their kind of community type club, where they were playing games all the time. It's in making music.
The thing is, I'd gone to a story with Kemi, and I think Ryder played, Randall played, and they were doing a PA. And I remember getting to the front, and Mark was on stage. He went, yo, and he's looking at me like mad. I'm like, yo, here's my number. And it was an 0831 number that I had on a massive brick phone. And that's how I got into. I want to go. I do artwork. I want to come and see you. So I called him up and went to the studio. Now he called me. We left a message, and then I went to the studio and showed him all this artwork that I was doing for like 10 records and 1159 and all this other stuff. And he was like, "Yo, cool. I want to redesign the logo." I looked at the logo. I want to redesign it. So I got in the door with the design work, and of course I was like, "Yeah, but in New York, Miami, blah, all the blag." And I think he'd heard about the Chris Biscuit thing had happened. Got this like Renegade 12 thing had happened, and then he was like, "Yeah, you want to do something?" And I went, "Yeah, but I want to do it. I've got my boys, Mark Rutherford in the studio. I want to go and do it there." You know what I mean? Because I was really nervous to be not an engineer and be not a programmer. I was really nervous to be able to work in that way. But because I've been with, for me, Harry B is very instrumental in this, because Harry B was the first going into a studio and seeing a real studio was Howie. He was doing Soul to Soul at Utopia and Mayfair Studios, along with the Boiler House boys, Andy and those guys at Mayfair. They had a room there. And I'd go in there because of Nelly. I'd met Nelly, he's at the studio, and then I met Howie. And then I'd just latch on to Howie and go to the studio and just watch him laying it down on the fucking desk and like, doodling on a 2-inch tape and just seeing him lay down stuff and, be mixing stuff in the twilight hours. And for me, that was my first experience. We tried to do something, but never quite worked because I was like, he wasn't on that kind of underground sound thing. So, he wasn't really programming in the way that I wanted to do that. But of course, Mark and Digo were. So sitting in with Digo and just seeing him on Creator, going vertically in black and white. People forget that. They were making music on Creator vertically. And for me, sitting with him and him having the patience, him and Mark having the patience for my madness, we were recording loops, putting them back to the desk, taking the recording, mixing the pots, like 3 or 4 sounds, recording it to that, taking that one DAT line, putting it onto one track. So you got like 3 breaks on one track, EQing them again, getting another set of sounds on another channel. So it was just the layering that Reinforced were doing, the layering. And for me, as soon as I latched onto that as an artist, I started, thinking if you can do that, then you can do this. So Digo was really patient, and Mark really patient with me with all these mad ideas. Because I'd come back from Rage on a Friday, I'd go in there like 12 o'clock. I heard this tune, man. It's amazing, this tune, like, and it was like a Nookie tune or like a Leo and a Baldy tune, and like, what do you mean? Like, whoa, slow down. And I'm like, it goes like this, all these mad little kind of sounds, and I try and describe it, and he goes, whoa, how does it go? Like the beats like this, boom, so okay, you know what break it was, so it's all of that kind of that language started unfolding between me and Digo, especially, and it was mad because I was always into the whole idea of pads and pad sounds and that that kind of thing, and Digo was kind of into that as well. So we started really experimenting with layers of pads and sounds and samples and getting the best out of it. So that's how I really connected with those boys, and then kind of A&R'd them really because they weren't going out. Going back to the question, they weren't going out. So I'd come back with all this kind of scout. I was on a scouting trip almost. Do you know what I mean? And it was this thing where I'd just be like, right, and it was Doc Scott was instrumental because, Scotty was I was a massive fan of Scotty. I'd heard about him, heard his music, heard Groove Rider playing it, and it was for me this. It was even more so. It was a change. It was darker. It was this darker music. I think the first tune I heard, Kemi played a cassette tape. And it was a tune called This Is Deranged. And it was Doc Scott and Keith Suckling. That record completely changed it for me. I'm like, I want to make this. And I think I took the cassette to Dollis Hill and played it, and Digo's like, boy, it's kind of like, it was dark, do you know what I mean? But it was like, all right, he's studying it. Excuse me. But I was always on that side of it because it was always hearing the darker breaks, the darker sound, because other people were going kind of helium. It was getting very helium out there. Production house was getting really, it was very helium. And, Charlie said to come out, Prodigy were doing all this stuff. And, if it wasn't for Prodigy, none of us would be here anyway in that respect. But for me, we were like, these kind of like, nah, man, we don't want to go down that route. It was almost as if, for me, there was a middle ground where it was kind of a slightly darker sound coming in. And then you had people like Homeboy, Hippie, and a Funky Dread from Archway. I mean, killer stuff, on white labels. It was just different. Demon Boys, another big influence in my life. That tune, Demon Boys, was like out there. And then EQ'd, all these other tunes that were coming out of East London. And that's what really got me on the ladder with Reinforced. But even more so, it was more of an A&R role. And I started obviously getting stuff cut on dub and taking it to Rage. Now I knew Groove and Fabio and Randall giving them dubs of Primary Source and all these new cuts and all this new music. And it was making damage, especially at Paradise. When you think about Paradise Club, in Angel, I mean that club was on a Saturday night. Kenny Ken, Gachet, Randall, early shift, back-to-back sessions, GQ on the mic. I mean, mind-blowing. It was like another level after Rage, you know. And you already had speed. You already had, you know, all these Mars, you know, which was Mars Bar, right? It was Mars Club, right, on a Thursday, opposite Astoria. So, I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but getting to the point for me, having this influx before pre-Blue Note, having Astoria and having, you know, the Mars Bar Club and having all these Astoria, Plumstead, you know, Ibiza Records, Paul from Ibiza doing his warehouse raves, and then going to like Lid Airport, and, you know, World Dance started blowing up on the back of Paradise Club, you know. And I was really into rave because, one, I kind of missed it, the beginning of it, going to New York and missing that early kind of Midlands explosion, like Shelley's, for example. You know, those clubs that were really where Groove Rider would go and play at Shelley's, and he said he was like going and playing a zoo. It was mad. You know, and he was, you know, Groove was huge in the Midlands before he was, you know, probably bigger than he was in London at the time. You know, and for me, and then Groove obviously being huge at Eclipse in Coventry, which is where, you know, Scotty used to sit with Groove on his box, and he would turn to Scotty and he'd play a tune, you know, and he could acknowledge Scotty. Scotty told me this on a Zoom interview, and he was like, that was Groove's boy. So, but you know, when I spoke to Groove, like, what's it? You know, when I first heard a Scotty tune at Rage, and I'm like, what is it? I'd run upstairs to the cage and try and look at what it is, and I go, what, you know, what is it? And after, when it's all done, I go upstairs. You're allowed upstairs. You know, you open the booth, and I could go in the booth. He'd be like, Scotty. I'm like, oh man, and I always wanted to meet him, and I'm thinking, who is this mythical kind of creature? Do you know what I mean? And I got in touch with him, something out there. We got in touch. But I met him, he was out DJing somewhere in the Midlands, and we met and shook hands. And I'm like, shit, he's got ponytail, blue eyes. But the music was just so dark. It was just so dark. Do you know what I mean? And it was like, I arranged to meet him in Music Power, and that was it. And then he came to my flat in Dorney Tower, and he brought down drums, and that was the first thing that we did. You know, we reinforced, and that first 12 he did was just unbelievable for me. And then, of course, Dark Ride, Dark Angel came, and I took him to Rage, and I'll never forget it. It was me and him, which did a double drop next to the podium, and Groove's playing Terminator into Dark Angel. And I took a look at Scotty, and it was just mind blowing, because for me, culturally, not only the kind of buzz or what it was literally, the record wasn't ours. It wasn't Terminator anymore. It wasn't Dark Angel. It was just this mix for like 128 bars or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? It was just this Groove Rider in the mix, you know, fighting for the mix and then locking it in, and we're just hearing something else, the creative side of it. But without going off track, I mean, Scotty was a massive influence, along with Mark and Digo, and of course then it was into Synthetic Records to do, you know, Angel EP, Terminator EP first, and the Angel EP, which was for me, I said to Mark and Digo, I feel kind of like awkward, you know, I've got this offer out on the table to do this deal, you know, what do you think? It's like, well, just do it, man, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you kind of done what you could do, and, you know, it's like, we're here for you, with the blessing. And that's what I wanted, the blessing, and they gave me the blessing, and, you know, I did the deal with those guys with Synthetic.
Can I ask you a little bit about just your lifestyle at the time? I mean, you know, you've come in from a different part of the world, you've caught something that you've just completely gone for. It's taken your life over. You're known for your art, but now music's there. You're this outsider to a degree. How did all the early drum and bass people, how did they perceive you? Were you a little bit of did they think of you as, oh God, that Goldie's here, he's a bit scary, he's a bit of a pest, oh God, he's going to try and get in the box? How did you manage to become that person?
I remember I met Fabio, and I think it was Voodoo Magic, Leicester Square. Groove says, you got to meet this guy, you know, but you know what, be careful, he'll talk your ears off. He's a bit mad. And, you know, Fabio said it on the same interview in this same project. He said, You were off your head. You were nuts. I was nuts. I was off my head. I was on this, on gear. I was on ease. I was off my head. But the one thing for me was the art. I was like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I was painting and I was doing art and I was drawing out stuff and doing stuff. It was, I was a managing addict, and still am in that respect of being like, indulgent and crazy. But then it was, for me, I almost feared ease in a way, because it was almost like it was too much. It was opening me up to a whole other thing. And the energy levels, I don't know. I hardly slept back then. I don't know. I've always been. I guess I was a Midland boy, right? So I was here, and I guess it was like, he's just doing all these movies, he's doing all these things, and he was starting to blow up. And I guess, I don't know. I've always been a loner anyway. I've always been a bit of a lone wolf, and the thing with me, I had reinforced behind me as a camp. Because I think the thing about b-boyism is that you realise either join the crew or get beat down. I couldn't have done it without reinforced. There's no way. Because they were so respected. Do you know what I mean? So I had a house, I had a camp, and love me or loathe me in that respect. It was I had a lot of this, and still have a lot of rants, but I backed it up with the music. And it was and I think one of the things to say here is that for me, I think what makes somebody go to the next level and change stuff is somebody who's got quite a lot of dimensions going on at the same time. And I think from your point of view, you had all that experience traveling in your art world, but then you also sort of connecting with the fashion crowd. You were going around the different types of clubs. And so you had quite a big overview of it all. You had a pretty big, strong, quite diverse music history in your head as well. You're as you were saying, you were listening to Pat Metheny or listening to jazz funk records, so you had a lot of that in there. And then when it came to the moment when you caught who you wanted to be, you started going in the studio. And here's the question for you: when did you feel that you owned the music that you were making in the studio? Because if you've not done music before and you're suddenly in a studio, you're paying for 3 days, and there's an engineer there, there's a producer, there's people looking at you going, you don't know what you're talking about. And so there's all that thing. When did you feel that you were owning what you were doing when you were in the studio? I think it was Chris Biscuit. There was a stopping point with Mark. We were stuck on the arrangement, and he was like, what do we do next? I'm like, I'm not sure. I want to get from here to there. And it was like, just take 15 minutes, have a lunch break, come back. And for me, it's always been that struggle where ownership, you're writing ownership, and an engineer is an engineer, and you don't want them to get involved because they're not a writer in that respect. And even though I broke stuff off for people along the years, for me, early on, I realised that this is what I want to do. Excuse me, I keep belching. For me, it's what I want to do, and I felt that that even with Linford, I was way ahead in terms of conceptually. And as much as the music was there, for me, it was the arrangement. And finally thinking about it, if I do this and I take that out, take the hi-hats off, move it back by 32 bars, take that sound, just put it there once, and then flip it with a reverse, and then you're in. So it was kind of like I had to really break it down. And there were times where I kind of struggled with it, but I kind of got it. I adapted very quickly. That Virgoian, being a Virgo, really adapted very quickly. And of course, the more samples you have, the more you got to arrange, the more you got to, is it too much? Is it too less? But I always knew that, when you look at the end of Chris Biscuit as an EP, and on the other side of it, and Jim Screech, and it was the eclecticism was there, the b-boy, the move, all of that stuff. This is what I want to say, blah 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 blah. And Mark was like, there's hardly anything left. And I'm like, well, I always knew where I wanted it to be, but I think 50% of it with anything was being up front and saying, I want to do this, this, and this, and not sitting there mumbling or going, oh, well, I leave it to you, because it was all about my life's always been controlled by others, being in care, being in institutes. You got to go there. That's what you have to do. So he was trying to take back my control almost, this is me. This is what I own this. I can own this. So the arrangement came very quickly, and it worked, because all of a sudden they're listening to it and going, wow, there's no naysaying. It works, because it's a new music to them also. To Mark and Mark Rutherford and Gosling, it was new to them. John took a back seat. It was just me and Mark and Linford, and it was just me and Mark, and it was kind of like, it's working. We had a little method, and I was explaining it right, and it was more about me slowing down my dialogue and saying, this is what I need to do. So I'd always, for me, it was always about that. I draw out, I go, this is, I want to do this. Give me a pencil, I want to do this, and I want to get to there. So I got all the building blocks, but then I got to arrange it all. And it was always about that from the very beginning. And I think Dark Rider EP was ownership. Wanting a track that Groove's going to play immediately. Dark Rider, that's Groove. You know what I mean? Going on, and the sound, Star Wars, whatever it was, sampling, whatever else.
Sorry. Was there any time? You go? Sorry, I'm cutting you.
No, you should do. You should cut me.
Was there any time that, because at that time, most producers were DJs, right? And you were going to the parties and you were in the DJ boxes, but you weren't playing out. You were cutting dub plates for you to play out or to give to people to play. And why did you not become a DJ then? Why did it take you longer?
Well, the reason why I never became a DJ then was because Kemi and Storm, they were going to be DJs. That was always the deal. Hustle, make the money, make the records, put the records out, buy the decks. And the first thing I did was bought them decks. Because our first experience of Kemi and Storm was dropping acid and at like 5 a.m, getting a Binatone stack system and an Amstrad, and one of us had to hold our fingers over each deck while they're playing Shades of Rhythm and trying to keep it in time in the mix without a mixer. They were always going to be DJs, and I was going to make the music for them to play. That was the dream, and it became the reality. And Kemi, even to this day, the mixes, I mean Jane as well, but Kemi, the mixes that Kemi would do, they were like minute and a half, like long, that she'd ride the mix, because they, Groove and Fabio, that's it, that's their demigods. But they were always going to be the DJs, because I was trying with them. I'm like, I can't do it. It's not me. I can't do it. But producing the record, so I'd come back with a cassette tape and go, "What do you think, Chris Biscuit?" Like, Kevin would be like, maybe a little bit more thing there, like a little bit more. Oh, okay. And I kind of get a little bit embarrassed and go back and tweak it and do it and come back and like, yeah, it sounds wicked. Do you know what I mean? Like, does it really? So there was that time of fragility. There was that naivety of knowing it sounds good. Nothing's going to sound naff, but is it in the right place? Can we, you know what I mean? But really, if it wasn't for Kemi and Storm, I mean, the samples from Linford having the breaks was one thing, but them having, rave sounds I could take from, I take a little bit from there, a little bit from there. And for me, it was all about going, right, tic-tac-toe. Hearing that for the first time, I want to make something like that. Tic-tac-toe, still to this very day, is one of the most unbelievable white labels. It's Basement Jacks. It's Felix. One of the biggest rave tunes that Groove was playing at the time. Well, Fabio was always playing it. So I'm like, all these influences and sounds were like huge. So I'd like to take a little snippet, reverse it, try and disguise it, being a b-boy. You take the move and make it better if you can. And so there was all of that. So for me, there was never a question I'm going to be a DJ. It was never going to happen. It was only until Blue Note where I kind of started DJing, because it came like, the album blew up, I'm there, people wanting to DJ. And I'm like, oh, so, I kind of learned to mix, but for me, I couldn't mix a salad. Do you know what I mean? It was like, cut the record, just put the record in, move it across. Everyone's like, yeah, it's Goldie, yeah, great, that's it. Couldn't mix a salad.